Today, we're going to be talking about how to make the most of every opportunity, especially going into Q4. I'm sure, how realistic pipelines are, but, you're probably looking at what deals are going to close out and make the rest of the year and how you're setting up for next year. And this year has been about, I think since at least March, has been about doing more with less. And we're going to talk about how to make the most of every single deal your team's coming across. So maybe before we dive into some specifics and get into, deal execution and tactics that, always gets me fired up, we'd love to get everyone's opinions just on this topic, why folks think it's been more challenging this year to get deals done, and what it means to, I think, make the most of every lead and opportunity for your sales organization. So maybe we can go in reverse order, and Trevor, I'll kick it off to you to get things started here.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think we forget, because we're just coming out of Q3, seeing just based off of, posts on LinkedIn, that was pretty challenging for everybody for a variety of reasons. But thinking back, one of the major challenges for this year is that everything's different from Q4 of last year, right? The macro and everything. If you look back at what was happening in Q4 of last year, thinking as a senior executive at a company, going through my own budget and planning exercises, the capital markets were different. Money was a lot cheaper. We were being rewarded for growth still, top line for its own stake in many cases. And a lot of the 2022 planning cycles reflected that, right? So whether it's headcount, whether it's software budgets, whether it's revenue targets, what have you, people were walking into Q1 and they were probably telling you, especially if you were in kind of a mid-market enterprise sales cycle, have the budget, secured budget for this year. We know what the process is. We know who the stakeholders are. And probably everything about that is different now than it was, in Q1.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other thing, and I'll turn it over maybe to Cory for you to comment further on this, but because things were changing very quickly, it was probably true that your technical buyer or your key contact or your coach, they actually didn't have complete information. And so they were probably self-reporting accurate information to you. And then suddenly you're wondering why you presented something for signature and everything changed. Or, something that supposedly was definitely in the budget. Now, things were softening up. And it wasn't just that, things are shifting inside of the company. It's like, who has the authority to make this decision? When are we going to make a decision? And if we're actually going to do anything this quarter, or whether we're going to kick things down, kick the can down the road for another quarter, that was really in flux, I'd say, for maybe a quarter and a half mid-year this year. So,
No, all very, very true points. And yeah, Cory, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think that savvy business people with experience know that it's not smart to predict bottoms, to call it and say, everything's washed out, we're good, it's all up from here. And because if you do it and you're wrong, you look really bad. You're going to probably lose your job and your reputation is going to be tarnished. So there's not a lot of upside in predicting a bottom. There's more upside in being prudent and being able to understand, well, how much more downside protection do we need in case there is downside? And a lot of folks that, if you zoom out and you look at why do public companies exist? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons you could argue, but at the end of the day, they're there to beat our earnings targets. And if people are spending less, then earnings are going to be lower. And you can fight a little bit of that by cost. Like, you can't cut your way to profitability, but you can cut your way to hitting your earnings targets. And in the venture-backed world, venture-backed companies pretty much exist for one reason, and that's to beat the public equity markets on a risk-adjusted basis. So there's a nice connection there. And basically, you've got all these people that you're selling stuff to that are trying to hit earnings numbers. And if their customers are buying less, the only way that they can do that is by managing earnings on the cost side. And so that's one of the things that from a macro perspective that I see driving things.
That's interesting. So to recap that, I guess public companies or larger companies have more levers because they can cut costs because they have more of these, G&A, other things like that. Whereas if you're a startup, goal, grow, sell to some of these larger companies, they're impacted by their own customers. You don't have as many levers really to pull as they do. These kind of scenarios. And then, Ryan, what's your investment banking perspective? No, I'm just kidding.
No, won't go back to the banking perspective. I think Cory got the public and the private markets, but I mean, 2022, end of a decade-long bull market. So with that, it just changes the kind of behavior that you need as a sales team, as well as how a company is going to operate throughout a decision-making process. I'd say before this year, you could probably get away with skipping steps and still find a way to have a good outcome. Maybe you didn't need to actually quantify the sale, do the ROI. Maybe you were kind of like at Powerline or had someone that had clout at the organization, but you didn't truly understand where the decision was coming from. Is this like a CEO directive? Is it a board level directive? So I think to the question of how do you maximize, you need to be as efficient as possible. And I think we'll probably get to it later in terms of what that means process wise, but having confidence that you aren't going to skip steps and that you're kind of going as consistent of a buying journey as possible, that you're kind of shepherding your cycles through. But I think that's what it comes down to, is that you need to make sure that you are getting to senior decision makers as soon as possible, because the people you're working with, they might be changing roles. Unfortunately, there could be layoffs, and a deal today is not a deal tomorrow. So trying to make the most of what you have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great bridge, Ryan, into the next question, which is like, what can you do? Okay, yes, people are spending less. Yes, decision makers are changing. Yes, there's more of a gap between, the above the line and below the line decision stakeholders, and deal execution is more important than ever. So how do we do that? How do we think about adjusting for, okay, we could get yeses for doing not the best stuff before. And this muscle, I think, like for a lot of companies and a lot of teams is, weak from 10 years of not doing this. And I see this every day. We work with over 150 B2B sales teams at very differing levels of execution. And those are the people that decided to work on this. That's not including the disqualified deals who are like, we don't even care about this because we're going to get infinite leads, and because deal execution doesn't necessarily matter to us. So would love to go through and kind of hear maybe two answers from everyone. One, maybe from a sales leadership perspective, with kind of your, VP, CRO hat on. Hey, how do you think we should be running these teams? And then maybe more from that rep frontline manager perspective, what can we be doing on a day-to-day basis to move the needle here? So maybe I'll pull up an example. If you want to treat every deal like it's gold, which you need to do now to hit your numbers, because you just need to really focus on your conversion rates, because there's going to be less great opportunities, and organically your close rates are going to be down. How do we do forecasts even for non-top 3 deals like every week, just to show the intensity towards it? How do you bring on the CEO or CRO and these key stakeholders every single week or twice a week and be like, let's go through all of our deals. We're going to do that first thing in the morning or even later in the day, like 5 to 7 p.m. We're just going to talk about how each deal has changed over the last few days. That's something that I've seen incredibly powerful. And what I think a lot of the top executing teams do is, it's not just a lot of the fancy stuff and reporting. It's let's actually talk about every deal and get creative on how we can be moving the needle. Who's that other stakeholder we can loop in? What's one, connection we can make from a mutual investor, something that's out there that's not usually part of the typical process. And then maybe from the manager, rep level, I think one of the things that everyone can do on deals, and I'm really passionate about this, is getting executive level alignment super early on. And Ryan, you kind of mentioned this. How do we, after we're talking to a qualified deal, maybe we're not at the end and we're not trying to get signature, how can we add value to that board level, CEO, C level, after that second deep dive where it feels really good and we just put together this business case? Hey, other executive, I just, synced up with our team. It sounds like there's something really exciting here. How can we figure this out together? I'm here to be a resource. So those are two things that pop into my mind, but I'll pass it over to Trevor next, both at that kind of, more executive level and then more the frontline perspective. How do you think about some tactics that either you're doing now or planning for Q4 to hit your goals?
Yeah. So I don't have anything better to say than if, go read Mark Cranny's article on this. It's still, I think, on A16Z. I think it's Control or Be Controlled. It's called Sales Forecasting Done Right. I know that's what it's called because I've read it so many times, but he starts with a great John Elway analogy about kind of like, How do you know, like, you're gonna, marching down the field, you're gonna score with 2 minutes left in the game? Like just his insistence that the only way that you can accurately forecast your pipeline is to interrogate every single deal in the pipeline and to have perfect knowledge of every single opportunity, especially at the mid-market enterprise stage. And so I think that's what we lose sometimes when we talk about sales methodologies, or even like, Salesforce documentation, everything like that. Is the entire purpose is not just simply to collect data to visualize it. It's a structured methodology for interrogating, what's actually true and what are things that are happening. And Ross, yeah, I mean, especially when things become challenging and you really want an accurate picture of the world, and things are pretty, there's volatility and things change quickly. Some of the benefit of doing pipeline reviews is not just having an accurate, forecast, but actually like hearing the words that our customers are saying and starting to like interrogate, like look under the hood and like, what does this actually mean? And are we starting to see some, are we starting to get similar types of feedback? And then how should that inform, not just like simple, like how do we overcome objections, but like, how are we retooling the sales process to facilitate and overcome those change management obstacles that are starting to show up? So that's one, is just go read Mark Cranny. And then two, as far as like, how can you do something different today that'll allow you to maximize your success? One of the things that I found is like, don't be complacent with your storytelling. References become extremely powerful at this point in time. And the value proposition, or how you describe the impact it's going to have in the organization. If you're still using, again, like the business goals were different in 2021. So if the stories you're telling are 2021 stories, and they're very top line oriented, and it's all about just like, we help someone 10x their business, and someone's like, we don't plan to 10x our business for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that, the way that you're describing your value proposition is going to match, or, to ladder up to the goals that the executives are now managing the business to. So
I love that. And I've seen that with our own stuff, and kind of been like cringe on some of our stuff on our website that we shipped, a year ago. Like, oh, that's just not going to resonate at all with sales organizations today. And that changed really, really fast. So yeah, really good point on the positioning in the market and storytelling, to make sure you're resonating with your customers. Cory, what about yourself?
Well, I double down on Trevor's first point and really emphasize structure over narrative. One of the things that I see people struggle with in pipeline review meetings specifically is they just talk and they're like, oh, I had a great meeting with so-and-so and I think it really well, and they like us, and just all of this fluffy narrative. Whereas if you have a lot of structure around what are the fields, what are the exit criteria, what's a good example? I think from a leadership perspective, in addition to structure, one of the things human beings struggle with in general is being able to distinguish good from bad without examples. And so from a training development perspective, being able to say, all right, here are 10 examples of what a really good deal at stage 4 in the CRM looks like. Here's 10 examples of what bad looks like. And you can pull them from your own team because you have good and bad, and really get people dialed in with a by memory rote understanding of what good versus bad looks like, and then drive that, operationalize it, and make it a system that works, as opposed to chit chat narrative and people wanting to talk about things. That's the leadership piece. And then for the cheap party trick that everybody can use, the sentence I like is, this person's going to buy for me because so-and-so is going to go ask for $50,000 from their CFO because, and if that sentence does not stand on its own, then it's not a deal. And then you can obviously put that next to the risks that I see in this deal are X, Y, and Z, and I'm doing A, B, and C about them. So just those two simple little things, that they're going to invest or stick their neck on the line for X dollars because something that's probably a really compelling pain point for someone with power. And then have a clear idea of what the risks are. And if we're doing anything about them, if we don't know what to do about them, that's where discussion can come in. Those are some simple things that folks can do now.
I love that. And I think that has changed, that the answer, how you think about that answer being reasonable, has changed dramatically in the last year. Before, because it's going to support their 10x growth this year. As soon as you try to have that same answer, you're going to be like, wait, what? Like, that's not at all what's happening right now. Like, why are you going to use the social capital? Well, 10% of their staff just got laid off and all these other things. Why are they going to spend this money? Well, it's definitely not going to be for that reason. It's going to be something else that hopefully makes sense given, the context right now. So that's a great one, Cory. And Ryan, to round us out.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to have any silver bullets here, but I really like what Cory was talking about from a forecast perspective. So something we did recently at Stripe was to have consistency on both the time and the format for the way that we run forecast calls, because previously some leaders were doing it in one-on-ones, some weren't doing it at all, and we just didn't really have a consistent way on how we were calling our deals. And when we were in forecast calls for the people that were having it, it was much more focused around why is this close date off, just kind of like in the minutia of the hygiene. So now that we have a day when leaders are doing it, kind of leaders reporting up to the CRO and then up to the CFO in a different meeting, it's like all of that happening on a certain cadence. And the expectation is that hygiene is completely up to date before those calls. Then you can have more strategic conversations when you're doing the forecast. We also rolled out Medic a few months ago, and then using that in the forecast calls. So, you know, what Cory was mentioning of how do you know if it's a deal or not, or if you don't have like the consistency there, it's nice to just kind of use that framework to drive better motions and not have as much just kind of questioning on like, is this real, is this not, and variance across the board. For a party trick, maybe I'm a little biased because I used to work at Slack, but I'm a huge fan of getting customers in a Slack channel. I'd say when you're getting multi-threaded, just like bringing people into the fold for the evaluation that's already been taking place, as well as like core negotiations towards the end, it just makes things a lot easier. I think you can build stronger relationships by bringing those conversations there. You know, the old saying was, if you don't have your champion on text, you might not have a deal. And I think that Slack can solve a lot of those problems too. So for kind of like at the AE and frontline leader, frontline level, it's a good thing to add to the mix.
Totally. Yeah, we started doubling down on that as well, Ryan. And then, yeah, just saw a good question come in here from Derek. Trevor, if you want to, I don't know if you feel passionately about this one. The immediate thing that went into my mind were consequences to not, but maybe more of a carrot level thing. If someone wants to jump in with an idea of how you've kind of tried to incentivize AEs on your team to consistently update the things that we're talking about that are going to drive this level of deal execution.
Yeah, I mean, so there's just the answer for me has always been reciprocity, right? Is that there's got to be value received from the rep in order for them to really see why this is a valuable use of their time, right? And so what I would focus on as a leader is whether it's through one-on-one sessions, group conference calls, or whatever the format, is the sales coaching valuable? And is data that they've inputted prior to the meeting being used in a way to drive those meetings? And if it's very clear that we're using the data for a reason, the data informs the conversation, and that either I get a lot out of my sessions or I get very little, and that it's very clear that the top performers are also the ones that receive the best coaching because they're also doing all the things that they're supposed to do. Those social norms take over pretty quickly. The things that have never worked for me, or things that have always bothered me when I was at different levels of an organization, where I'd get an email at 10 o'clock at night from, you know, sales ops saying this has to be updated before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning because I'm going to run so-and-so is going to run a report and they're going to give it to the CEO. And nothing makes your blood boil as a rep who, put in a 12-hour day, your heart, you've got all this blood pressure from what's going on in your own pipeline, your own personal earnings are on the line. You couldn't care more about what's going on in the world. And then kind of the insinuation that you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And that, people are willing to, call a fire drill for the sake of managing up or, doing something that's important to them, but not valuable to you. So
yeah, or your customers. Yeah.
Exactly.
Helping the business. Yeah.
And so, I always also say, look at your account page. And if stuff isn't getting filled out on by most reps, it's either not important because you've been managing the business without it, or if it is important, then you need to do, it's basically a product, right? It's like, if the product isn't if you're not getting the results from the product, you need to fix the way the product's being used in order to get the business data that you need to, to drive results. So.
Okay. Very empathetic answer, Trevor.
One thing that we see work really well, especially with folks that want to get promoted into management, is when people aren't doing it, it's usually a mindset challenge. Like, it's not important to me. So helping them understand why it matters. And then if they want to get promoted to management, well, a big part of management is pipeline accountability. So not saying it like this, but basically getting to the point through conversation of, you want me to promote you to manage people to be accountable to their pipeline, but you're not accountable to your pipeline. So we can have that in a nice coaching style, but that's the bottom line to try to get across.
Yeah, I like both those, helping them see the value. It's almost like we're salespeople. Awesome. Well, we just launched a poll here, talking about sales execution, and actually perfect parlay into the next question that I had for the group here. Wanted to dig into, where are we finding the most common friction points during the sales process, especially recently. I think one thing that's been top of mind for me and a lot of our customers has been, I think this was brought up as well, is like the difference. There's always a difference. I love that there's like this classic sales training expression about speaking different languages, where people below the line, or certain roles will speak Greek, others will speak Italian, and then executives might speak whatever it is, Mandarin. I think that's been like exponentially more true lately, where I've seen just this huge disjointed alignment between people at different levels of the organization, because things are changing so fast, and pressures from the business, I think, have shown up in very different ways this year. So maybe we can talk about, if this is something that's not just on my side, see people nodding along here, at least on the participants, talking about ways to help bridge that gap between, in terms of deal execution, that person that might have reached out with that core problem, and getting budget to actually solve that, and making sure that that problem is aligned to that business level, board level initiative. Yeah, Cory, I'm curious to get your take on this, how you think about bridging that gap between frontline folks now, maybe manager level, and that VP.
Yeah. Well, I think the key is you got to understand the pain for each person in the org as it relates to what you're trying to solve for. So for example, like, we sell sales coaching software. Well, the pain for VP is obvious. My managers aren't coaching, so their reps are struggling to hit their goal, and we could get more out of people. Well, what about the CFO, who is going to ultimately block or approve this? What does the CFO need in terms of employee efficiency, capacity utilization, if you will? And then what's the alternative? If some people don't make it, pull them out of the org and lose capacity, hire new people in and miss out on productivity for a period of time? Or do we make an investment and try to help those people up level? Well, that CFO lens is going to be much more financial, as opposed to the VP of sales, which may be more human, which is going to be different from the frontline manager, which may be more emotional. And then obviously, HR is thinking about, well, how do we do that with the whole team instead of just the sales team? So just understanding all of the different players and kind of what they really care about, and what's going to get them to either support a deal or become a saboteur and try to block it. Yeah. Instead of just being satisfied with, I got one person to tell me they're paying, and so I'm going to get a deal done.
And I think that's where we've probably been weakest to this adjustment, is that next stakeholder too, that were involved in decisions, but weren't blockers before. And now are involved in decisions, and we haven't baked them into the process.
Yeah. Now
we need to kind of take that step back earlier to take a step forward later, where we're getting these deals done. And we're like, wow, our sales execution compared to what we were doing before is amazing. Why is this getting blocked here? Well, there was probably, some meeting that happened with some stakeholder that we didn't prepare for, because that wasn't the case before. And how do we get ahead of that earlier on, instead of saying, oh, this is happening then? It's probably happening weeks before, and we could have done something. That's a really good point, Cory, and kind of customizing it to them and working with your champion to identify those points where you can kind of get ahead of that. Cool. Ryan, what about your thinking here? Have you guys seen this at Stripe?
Yeah, definitely. And as you know, payments is a very complicated industry. So I think depending on what's actually happening in the cycle, because often we'll get RFPs and it could be someone pretty low level who's coming to us with that. So if it's maybe a product manager or an engineering manager, and Stripe's a premium product. So if we're being told that we're more expensive than what they're looking at, and payments being super saturated, it's like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, we need to go through the process of figuring out what is the total cost of ownership, because expensive means different things. And because PayPal or Adyen might be charging X, the onus is on the sales team to like really dive in and find out like, what is the interchange cost that company's paying? Why are they paying that? Like, are they actually looking at the same product set for the alternatives that they might be with Stripe? And that is going to differ depending on like the latitude of where you are in the organization. So that can certainly be a friction point. I think it comes down to, understanding like, how is that person motivated? So knowing like how senior they are and like what kind of stake they have in going through the motion.
Yeah, that's a great point. Big challenge, especially with something that's more commoditized or a very crowded market. People are looking at price these days, but obviously that's not what, businesses are built off, and technology companies aren't, it's not like buying coffee beans. Well, I'm not a big coffee drinker, so maybe people feel strongly that that matters a lot. But you catch my drift. It's not buying commodity. But a lot of the times, especially these days, I think we get cornered into, well, I'm going to do it, hack it together internally, or you cost this, or hey, I looked at the market and this super old legacy player only charged me this. Now you're anchoring there. And it's like, how do you reframe that, not get tied when you need to close these freaking deals and they're super valuable? I think that's a psychological challenge, I think, for a lot of reps and managers when they look at their pipeline. And it's a super counterintuitive thing that I think everyone on this call has probably learned is the lower you go for price and the more you lean into that, the likelihood of even the deal closing at all is lower. It's not just for that lower price. You suddenly lose your leverage on the deal and the value that you're proposing. And that's, I think, a really, really tricky thing. I mean, people already were using, and we did this as well, using the lever of price for the end of the month or end of the quarter. I think almost that puts you at a disadvantage because only key things are getting done now. Yes, it can help unblock some budget things, and you can kind of massage that on a case-by-case basis. But if it's not the most important thing to do right now, people are doing have far fewer initiatives these days and far fewer vendor decisions. So that might actually hurt you in the end. Cool. We got about 9 or 10 minutes here before we wrap up. So let's finish up with one final question. Maybe instead of this, one-off tactics and things like this around the sales journey, any kind of more broad like sales process stuff that you think is really important in these times with your organization or your team, things that you really want to make sure that, maybe outside of the forecasting stuff that we talked a bit about, maybe more deal execution, like what are you making sure, from a rigor and operational perspective that your sales organization is going to do to, hit goal in Q4? Maybe Ryan, I'll let you kick us off here.
Yeah, so been pushing the team to get on site as much as possible where it makes sense. We kind of talked about getting above the power line and trying to get in front of the C-suite. And I think that that hasn't changed even after the pandemic. Like, people still want to be meeting with other people in person. And we've just seen across the board that it makes cycles much more efficient to do that. So that's been one thing in the toolkit. And then kind of comes down to the fundamentals, right? Making sure you're sending a follow-up within 24 hours of a meeting. In that follow-up, it doesn't even need to be a fully documented joint success plan, but it's like very clear, what are the action items, who's taking point on them, and exec sponsorship, super important on both sides, right? Who's going to be sponsoring on this from the customer side, who's going to be sponsoring it from the vendor side, and then for more formal joint success plans, have been pushing that as well. Not in my segment, kind of a combination of some more transactional deals versus the strategic ones. So it's not going to make sense to do those all the time, but certainly anything over 100K, full stop, there should be a joint success plan. And I think a lot of people fall under the trap of just bringing those to the point of signature and executing paperwork. And I think challenging the team that should go through deployment. So you can actually back into all those important dates, right? It's going to vary depending on the product that you're selling. But no matter what, there's going to be time post-sale leading up to the deployment where you're probably going to have different stakeholders involved. And you want to make sure that you're having those conversations as early as possible.
And why would they care that you're getting the signature closed? And that's the thing you keep going back to. You're only going to get so much urgency if you're going to like, hey, by this date, we're going to solve this business problem or unlock this thing. That's probably the better way to approach it. So totally agree. And yeah, on sites, I mean, I feel like the world talks about that all the time. And yet so many people don't take the time and just kind of prioritize, hey, who are you going to meet with this month or the 6 weeks? And people aren't on the road all this time. I don't know where that comes from, but like every time you do it, you're like, holy shit, the conversation I had, I would have never had that for 2 months. This deal could have died because this thing would have come up. And I met this other person at the office who told me this thing. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize this person was going to be involved. So yeah.
We did this at Slack, and it's been a pretty big success at Stripe as well, creating a channel called Tales from the Road. So when you are on site, take a picture with your customers, and then you start bringing in like your product team and engineering, and they can see the fruits of their labor. And it's just, yeah, really cool way to bring the company together when you're traveling for sales.
I love that idea. Awesome. And Trevor, what about you and your team?
Well, want to build on one thing Ryan said real quick, and it'll feed into my point, but 100% aligned on the mutual action plan. But one of the things that it's more than just a timeline, right? It's agreement that this is the way in which change will be enabled inside of the customer organization. And one of the counterintuitive things that will be different this year than last year is last year in growth environments, budgets are highly federated. People have a lot of autonomy. And it's actually a lot of times just easier to buy from my department and just implement my thing. I don't have to work cross-functionally. I don't have to get buy-in. And then I'll say like, we'll do it quickly. And then you can land and expand. Like I know how to talk to sales reps. It's like, trust me, this will be the easiest way to like, for you to get, a beachhead into my work. In this new environment, even at my organization, I mean, we're looking to rationalize all these one-off department level solutions, and we're actually moving to a more centralized decision-making process. So I would say one of the things that we need to convince, our customers to do is actually like work cross-functionally to build consensus and actually to grow the value that in the impact that it's going to have inside of their organization, because that's actually going to make it easier and faster for them to accomplish their goals. But it's counterintuitive to maybe the way they operated last year, especially if they're like a mid-level manager or kind of a non-senior executive. So the thing that, that we're building for, for our champions internally is just like the tools and presentations and deliverables that they'll need to sell internally. And it's not just like forward the deck along. We're actually training people to deliver, the plan that we've developed together and leaving nothing to translation error, right? It's not that, a lot of times, even though we want to present it ourselves, inevitably, we're going to be relying on someone else presenting for us internally. And so, doing the work as the sales organization to ensure that your champion is best positioned to deliver the message for you is worth, when we're talking about, making sure every deal counts, it's worth doing that every single time, as opposed to just for your biggest deals or just when the customer says it's a good idea or things like that. So
I think that's been the biggest shift that I've seen is like this mindset of, yeah, for the biggest deals, we'll do this because the others are kind of a crapshoot and roll the dice. Like, no, none of those are happening unless you do the right thing exactly. Because that there's going to be, it's so much easier for things to get blocked or shot down right now. And to round us out, Cory, any strong thoughts or opinions on that before we close out and I'll get back to making the most of our opportunities and deals?
Yeah, I mean, we're sub 50 customers. We're early with CoachCRM. And so what I'm really focused on is if you don't do anything, where are you going to be in Q1? If your managers keep coaching the way they are, if you keep having the same visibility into what they're coaching on and the impact that they're having, if that just stays the same, what are you worried about? And that's making people pretty nervous because it's time to get more out of your people, and rising tides float all boats and sinking tides expose rocks. I don't know if that's a saying. I just made it up, but it sounds.
I think there's what's the I love the saying. It's like when the tide goes out, you see who's naked. That's the quote, or I don't know.
See, Ross, I was trying to keep it professional and not invoke nudity, but if we're going there, we're going there.
Yeah, I know the professionalism just dropped. No, but Cory, I love that because it brings up, maybe it's the optimist in me, but the opportunity that comes along with this. Where most deals are lost from not making a decision, right? We all know it's not, the competitor won half of them and I won half of them, whatever. That's not why we have a great close rate, 30 or 40%. It's because most people don't make the call. And I think now more than ever, there's an opportunity to bring up that sense of urgency as like, fine, not us, but how are you going to solve this problem? And putting them back on the customer. And I don't think that's actually something that we've leaned into enough, and kind of gives me a good idea, which is why I love running these sessions with smart.
Well, and get them to say it out loud. They're not going to be able to articulate, like in their mind, they're gonna be like, oh, we'll figure it out. But do you mind sharing 2 minutes? what you're
You
gonna
reached
get.
out or talked to me because of this thing.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, you're not going to. So what is going to happen?
Well, because here's what they're really worried about. They're really worried about their status inside the company, because if their budget's slashed or it's down to the last wire, they're going to go and they're going to say, hey, Trevor, I need another 25K. And they're going to say, why? And you're going to say, because this, and you're going to say, you sure? And you're going to say, yes. And then you're going to look bad if it doesn't work. So that's what they're worried about.
Yes, that's the social dynamic right now is like very real.
They all have the cash. The cash is there. They have lines of credit. They have credit. Like hardly anybody doesn't have, I mean, companies in bankruptcy will spend $10 million on something if they actually need it in the offshore drilling space, for example. People have cash to spend. It's the question is, are the human beings nervous about the negative impact of their status if they do it and it doesn't go well?
Yeah. And then it's our jobs for making them, arming them. I think Trevor put it really well, is like leaving nothing to chance. The talk track they're going to use, really enabling them and empowering them to have that conversation and them to feel really good about it if they get shut down. I feel like this is the right thing for us to do. And I think it's really challenging, I think, for a lot of reps and frontline managers, because they're going to be worrying about their quota and hitting the numbers, and customers can feel that. So it's this like a really tough challenge of needing a lot of empathy for your customers right now. Well, you're under a lot of pressure. And I think that is a tough equation when you kind of have these opposing sides of much more challenging with customers. The time they used to be able to spend with you is probably higher. So their cycles are starting to change. And it's more important than you to close the leads that you have. And you need to be really cognizant, I think, of, you know, how you're framing things and having those conversations and not letting your, the pressure of your job get into the sales motion. Cool. Awesome, guys. Well, this was super helpful. I got a lot of stuff to take to my team, at least. Hopefully the folks listening in live or the recording did as well. And the rest of you can kind of take from others on the call. But this was awesome. Appreciate it, Ryan, Trevor, Cory, and best of luck with this week, month, and closing out the year.